I made contact with the Rochester Police Department today because I haven't heard from my daughter in 3 days. And so, after getting transferred and rerouted and stuff, I eventually connected with their 911 dispatcher that said, you should do a missing persons report. I'm going to send a police officer over to meet you. So I waited for about an hour, and a cop, I'm on the right-hand side of the road, parked in a parking space, and he just does crosses the roadway and pulls up next to my window and says, "So what's going on?" So I explain the situation to him, and he explains to me that they're how they are structured. How they are structured in Rochester, New York. They are broken up into 5 precincts. And he was the downtown cop. And the last place I saw her was over by that jurisdiction would be the Goodman section, okay? So, as soon as he said we're broken up into 5 precincts, my mind automatically switched to the 5 boroughs down in New York, which I'm very familiar with the 5 boroughs, by the way. And so, why they would ever mimic what happened and how those 5 boroughs actually came about, like that right there is a pattern should never be repeated, okay? In a nutshell, let me just explain for those who really know nothing about the history of all this land. So, when the white settlers first started coming here, how it all worked was the wealthy came first, okay? So the wealthy people of, let's just say, England would pay top dollar and top price for the safe voyage to the New World. And so it didn't matter how long it took them, how many stops they made along the way, as long as they made it there safe. The price that they paid was pretty hefty price, okay? And they carried with them more of the same, okay? So they carried their wealth with them. Upon entering the New World, they entered through what was labeled up as Ellis Island, okay? It was basically almost like the Plymouth Rock, where the ships would come in, they would get off the ships at Ellis Island. There'd be smaller boats that would carry them through to land. Once they got to land, they all carried with them drawings of their perfect section of land, how they wanted their houses to be built, blah, 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 blah. They would take those drawings that they already had crafted up from wherever they came from, and they would take it to these pattern type people who would say, You would need to purchase X number of male slaves and X number of female slaves to make that happen. So they would basically carve out on a map that said, you're going to find your dream spot over here, and then you're going to need to carry with you X number of female slaves and X number of male slaves. The section of land now known as Queens held all, sorry, my throat's kind of froggy today, they were called holding pens, and they had all female slaves in varying colors. When I say varying colors, that means because the original people of this land got enslaved on their own land, and people from other places and other sands were brought here to those holding pens to be sold as slaves. So females were held in Queens. The males were held in, they called it the Bronx, which ultimately became the Bronx. The Manhattan, it was basically the catwalk, if you will, where the slaves that were on display or show would walk through the land known as the Manhattan, where they could get to hand select their slaves, both male and female. If at any point in time a male slave showed any type of ruckus and or issue with what was going on with his female, who was also a slave, they would break them down at the knees, and that ultimately, that section of land where they broke them all down, that was called, ultimately became Brooklyn. The section for the status where they stood from the island, almost like a platform, Staten Island, was where the rich people first stayed and conducted all their business before they moved on to that selected section of land after purchasing their slaves. So that's how all these big mansions, historical big mansions, are out there. It's that process. They entered on the island. They were brought to the Statland, which was the trip from the island to almost like the platform where they got to stand and barter, trade, and purchase. The queens, which are the female slaves, both original people and other women of varying colors that were brought and housed in the queen type section. The bronze were the men. Didn't matter what age or color, they were all in the same section. The Manhattan was the catwalk, if you will, where they got to select their slaves. And any man that got any type of issue with how they were pawing at, touching, or whatever, his wife or woman, who was also placed into slavery, if he made any type of ruckus on what they did to that woman, he was broken down. And, they knocked down with a large blow, and behind the kneecap to knock him down on the ground, and he was pulled away, and they beat the hell out of those people. And that's the broke the limbs became Brooklyn. And why anybody would even try to mimic those earlier days, and they were all held in these dirt-filled areas, where you'd house animals, where they traded like livestock. And, the history of the United States is filthy as hell. And they've done nothing in all this time to ever clean any of that stuff up. And it's actually so sick to make a reference back to those places in New York. I mean, filth. Filth all the way. New York State is the filthiest, grimiest place, armpit of the United States of America. What a day. Down memory lane, as we all know it, if you're carrying the right form of blood. I wanted to go into the blood, what the blood did, but the planes, but during those days, but I'll hold that for another session.